here just to grow up?
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to like travel.
How do you mean grow up? In what sense?
I don't know. I guess like being independent.
Okay. Okay. I want to make sure you talk about growing up. It scared me for a second.
Oh, like getting old?
Yeah, growing up and getting mature and doing the right thing and all that stuff.
Much. Like that was the problem.
Why?
It's like therapy right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, why is it such a bad thing to grow up early, to grow up fast? Or I'm sorry, to mature fast, sorry.
Because then you can't really,
Yeah, like
you can't get help from other people, or you can't rely on others.
You can't get help from
no,
others.
it's not that you can't.
Well, you don't accept it, because you've been always doing everything yourself.
So you see the dawn before everybody else.
Been like that since 5.
Yeah, if you see the dawn before everybody else, how do you go back to everybody who hasn't seen it yet and get advice from them about it? No, I asked that question because when Wilde's talking here about the dreamer who's seeing the dawn before everybody else, that is what you're talking about. Like when you say what you're saying right now, my life is wasted potential, and you seem upset when you say that, and that's why I'm saying good, because that's an awareness. That's a dawn that you're arriving at long before a lot of other people. Most people don't get to that point until much later in life. I'm talking like 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. People who look back on life and go, I could have been X, Y, and Z. I could have done this or that. If you're at 18 right now and thinking, oh my gosh, my life is wasted potential, that's a pretty significant thought to be having at 18, because that sets you 30, 40 years ahead of most people if you take that statement seriously. You know, like I was saying before, like none of us really knows the upper limits of our potential. I mean, if I'm asking, if anybody in here, if you say, no, I'm not living a life of wasted potential, that sucks, man. I wish you knew that you were, because you are. Is anybody in here taking full advantage of their potential? Is anybody taking full advantage of their opportunities? No. None of us are. But there's two attitudes to take towards that. But that's okay, because nobody is. Do you want to be like everybody else? No. Yeah, do you want to waste your potential like everybody else? Do you want to be, whatever, you want to have kids someday and then impose all of your unlived life on them and say, you're going to be a baseball player, or worse yet, you're going to be a boxer. This gym I used to go to, they used to have this kids class for boxing. I'm talking like however old this is. And these kids would spar, And I remember thinking, like, I don't know if they shouldn't be sparring at this age, man. They're too little, And there's like this one little kid, this little Asian kid, who's just, he was brilliant. He moved so well. He just beat up everybody, And I remember watching these poor little kids in the corner, and this little Asian kid just walking on them, and then bouncing out, bouncing back in, and you're just like, how old are you? You move like that? And you can see his dad over there, and his dad's yelling at him, move ahead, move ahead. And then when the kid finally finishes up, Dad's still yelling at him about how he wasn't moving enough, he didn't have enough going on there. And you see his kids getting their heads beaten in. And this is a kid who's going to, have brain damage when he's in his 30s or so, because his dad's going to be pushing him, because, his dad could have been a world champion, right? How many of our parents could have been a great dancer? How many of our parents could have gone to college? How many of our parents could have done all of these things? That's probably the second most miserable conversation I can imagine having. The first one, of course, being, remember when? Remember when we used to, you remember when? It's such a sad conversation to have. Secondly, it's probably that right there. Oh, I could have been. I could have been. And that's the unlived potential. There's probably nothing that's more psychologically damaging to children than the unlived lives of their parents. Because that's when we kind of impose those things on our children, saying, oh, I want you to do this. Well, isn't it a terrible thing if you, and I mean terrible in quotation marks, if you want your kid to be a boxer, and this kid's, and by the way, the kid's very talented, and then comes to you and says, Dad, I want to paint. What? Yeah, I want to paint. But no, you're going to do this instead. Now, there are certain things that it's probably a good idea to force kids to do, because it's good for them, not because it's our unlived. Like, for example, I won't usually tell you guys what I think about stuff, but I'm sure you can all figure this out. I think you should all learn how to defend yourselves. Everybody in here should learn self-defense, at least a little bit. You know, especially girls. This idea that, oh, somebody else will be your bodyguard. Not when you need it the most. You know, and the same is true for guys. You know, guys, learn how to do it. Not because you want to go out and pick fights, but because you'll know what to do in case of a situation. I'm not saying go out there and devote the next 10 years of your life to boxing or Muay Thai. But if you do, I know a great gym. Now, if you would commit your time essentially to becoming more of a full individual. You know? So, when you're saying that my life is a bunch of wasted potential, that's really good that you see that right now.
Yeah, but the one that I was talking about, like the conscious incompetence, when it's just like you want to do it, but the depression gets you, and you just physically can't do it, you know?
And it should depress you because you know what to do. And you can't get yourself to do it. The good that you wish to do, you do not do. And the evil that you wish not to do, that you end up doing. You know? You sit there and you stare at YouTube videos. Maybe it's like, okay, I'm going to learn something new today. So you start watching a YouTube video about some subject, and then fast forward 9 hours, and aren't pugs cute? Oh my gosh, the pug's wearing a pirate hat or something, you know? And then you realize that 9 hours cut into your 8 hours of sleep. Now you wake up the next day, sleepy, tired, I hate myself, because you wasted the time. I mean, there's actually a syndrome around Sundays. You ever walk around Sundays feeling particularly mopey and melancholy because it just feels like some impending doom, which is Monday? What's that?
It's all over.
Yeah. You know, and you just like, oh, you're miserable about it because Sundays feels like a wasted day. You know? What I'm saying is that it's a bad thing if you give yourself excuses to not fulfill that potential. None of us fulfills all of our potential. I mean, Leonardo, that guy did some stuff, right? And that guy, wrote in a letter towards the end of his life. He said that one of his great regrets was that he did so little with all of what God gave him. You know, that's Leonardo, who says, "I haven't done anything, man. You know, I haven't accomplished anything." Really, Leonardo? How do you suppose that Leonardo would feel if he looked at our lives? You've done what now?
We're all walking disappointments too.
Well, yeah, we'd all be walking disappointments to Leonardo because Leonardo was a person of genius, and we tend to be that way to people of geniuses. It's one of those dangers of putting geniuses in charge, because geniuses are so self-demanding that then they expect everybody else to rise to that level. Yeah.
Speaking of that, like when I was reading the Divergent trilogy, and how they live in the dystopian world where everybody is like in this sections. Yeah, we have like conversing about or talking about how like you never know which one is to rule the whole people, because if abnegation is too much, it's just too much giving to the people, and then the smart people, I think it was like erudite or something like that. Yeah, they just know too much to be ruling the people. It's just gonna be too smart that they're gonna take over.
Yeah. Because and this is, because when you know a lot, and you start to superimpose that onto everybody else, but not in the sense of like raising them up, like, oh, you guys are all that. It's more of like you expect it from people. Don't you know this? You know? It's one of those hard things about teaching, and especially teaching multiple years. In my head, I've probably taught you guys way more. I've probably taught you guys way less than what I think I taught you, because the years start to bleed together, plus the periods. Like I've had nothing but seniors the past several years, and I have 2 classes of sophomores this year, but if you multiply that out, like with the allegory, so I teach the allegory 5 times, and I teach it for multiple years, plus I taught it over at the college. And so you can start to see how all that together is like, oh, you guys know all about this stuff. Even right now, I'll lecture on it 3 times. So to me, I'll write the test and say, oh, they're going to know this one. This is such an obvious question. Well, why? Well, because I wrote the test, and because I lectured on it 3 times, so I didn't just hear it 3 times, I taught it 3 times. And then the tests come back, and the results are going to be what they're going to be. And I'll look at that and think, now there's 2 ways to approach that. Damn, kid. How come when I was your when I was your age, we studied our notes and we knew this stuff. Another way of looking at it is, oh, maybe I didn't teach the things I thought I taught. You know? Now, I take it personally either way, by the way. If I'm talking and I'm teaching something, and I see people who are students who are completely disinterested and disconnected with what I'm talking about, I keep thinking, how do I get that person's attention? How do I make this matter in such a way? And then if the whole class is like that, I can look at it and think, well, there must be something wrong with how I'm presenting it. Unless it's 10th grade, there's just something wrong with that. But I can look at that and I can take responsibility for it and think, okay, I need to do something differently, to get their attention to do that. And so I'm saying is that with all of these kinds of interpretations, we have those I guess those V's in the road that we can take. Completely wasted potential, but that's okay. Everybody's like that. I'm going to give myself license to be mediocre because we can't be too hard on ourselves. Oh my gosh, I'm wasting all this potential. Every day that goes by, I'm wasting more. I need to do something about it and fix it. There's just something wrong with the students because I don't know. They're not what they used to be. Oh shoot, if they're not what they used to be, well then there might be something wrong with how I'm teaching it now. I need to get this sorted out so I can reach this group of students like I feel like I reached other ones, It's two different ways of approaching all these kinds of divergences, And then this is the thing though, like if you're a dreamer, you're going to have to presuppose that there is an answer to it, That's a hard thing. Because you think about, like I've mentioned before, you're looking at people who were dreamers historically, people who were inventors or great intellects, people of geniuses. Part of the problem with being that sort of a thing is that you come up with all kinds of crazy ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, I was writing about how being a dreamer, how all these ideas that you're feeling starts to conflict each other. It's just you just don't know what to believe when you overthink every single thing and you start analyzing people.
Yeah. But then not
necessarily analyze, but
well, no, that's good. I think the wisdom comes from there probably. When do you know that you're overthinking versus when do you know that you're just analyzing deeply? A lot's going to have to do with how much you can sort out. That's why it's important to practice that thing of thinking deep things and then sorting them out. If you're thinking a deep idea and then all of a sudden you get in this spinning cycle and you just get super confused and you're like, oh, I'm just overthinking it. Maybe you need to stop and process it and think more about it. Because that it's not going to get any better by not thinking about it, by not working it out. You don't get stronger by looking at the weights and going, maybe I'm just overlifting. Anybody in here overlifting? Maybe the problem is that we're underlifting, so that when we come across a heavy weight, we can't lift it. Maybe if we had, worked out a little bit more all along the way, we'd be able to lift those heavy things when we come across them. The same is true about thinking. Maybe part of the problem is that we haven't done enough heavy lifting in our minds, with our brains, but with our minds better, to lift heavy ideas when we get to them. Maybe, when we look at ideas, I think we should look at it and go, we say, that's just not interesting. No, it's interesting, because even everything is interesting. There's people out there who study rocks. Geologists, they study rocks. You can sit there and go, well, rocks aren't interesting. Well, they're interesting to those folks, obviously. They're not interesting to me. They're just not interesting to me. They're probably not interesting to most people who are in this room. But there is a group of people out there who dig their rocks, man. Every subject can be interesting. If something's not interesting to me, it's good to know why. Rather than, and it's important to know that. In other words, if I'm looking at the idea of rocks, is it that my mind just isn't going around it because I haven't lifted enough weights in the area of rocks, mental weights in the area of rocks? Or is it that rocks are just really goddamn boring? You think well, rocks are just boring. Do you like volcanoes? Super volcanoes could end the world? That's interesting stuff. But you got to know some geology before you can understand that stuff. So nothing. Very few things are interesting at the very basic levels. It's one of those dangers when students will tell me that they're taking philosophy classes at the college, despite me saying over and over again, don't do it. They'll still go and do it. And then they'll study something really, maybe they get a great professor, maybe they get one who's not, maybe they take the right subject. I have a student right now who's taking logic, and the student's like, yeah, this is really boring stuff. Yeah. What do we do with the interesting stuff after you learn logic? You have to know how to approach arguments and formulate them. Then you can understand philosophy. I gotta lift these weights? Yeah, man. You gotta go run your quarter miles before you can run your miles, before you can run your marathons. Oh, that's boring. Oh, you're wasting. You're right. By the way, you're right. It is boring, but you're wasting potential. You know, that's the thing about the dreamers. That the dreamers are lifting mental weights to answer problems that they don't even know that there's a solution to. You know, we used to say in philosophy that if philosophy was easy, it would be rocket science. Because in rocket science, at least you know there's an answer. We can get this rocket off the ground, we just got to figure out a way to do it. We have to figure it out through engineering. How do we do this? You know, with philosophy or any kind of deep thinking like that, you're trying to answer questions that you don't even know if they have an answer to. So how do you even know if you've answered it? How do you even get to that point? That's a hard thing, man, because you look at people like I was saying before, like Sigmund Freud. We look at this guy and we remember him for all of his crazy ideas. Oh my God, he believed in this and that and that. But the things that we don't remember him for are the things that he was so right about that they're part of our general collective unconscious right now. Like we walk through the world and we just realize that the experiences we had as children have shaped the person we are today and inform our behaviors today. We just take it for granted. That's where it comes from, though. In other words, his ideas were so right that they've just become part of what we naturally think now. We just understand it. But his crazy stuff is the stuff that we remember him for. That's part of the problem. If you're thinking of deep ideas, you're going to come up with some crazy stuff that's going to be wrong. You know? And then it's going to feel like a waste of time. But it's not a waste of time if you approach and you arrive at those really interesting moments of clarity all along the way. You know? Here's the problem, though. If you get to that point, you're going to reach that dawn before anybody else. And then you're going to come back, and you're going to be Mark talking to 12th grade Mark talking to 9th grade Mark. Let me tell you what I've discovered. But I learned this. I know this stuff now. You know? And the world won't listen. I have former students who visit me who just graduated like last year or the year before last, 2-3 years ago, and they'll come back and they'll see students now and be like, "What's wrong with them, Scanlon?" You know, "What do you mean, what's wrong with them?" "Well, look at how they're acting. Now look at the class, because I've given you freedom to do the thing. I give you the assignment, I tell you the due dates, I give you the freedom to do those things, and the exact same stuff I did for them 3 years ago. Now I'll look at them and I'll be like, what's wrong with them? Yeah, let me tell you. The exact same thing that was wrong with you when you were here. And you know how I know that so well?
Because it happens every year.
It's the exact same thing that was wrong with me when I was sitting there. You know? A symbol of maturity is going, a sign of maturity, a demonstration of maturity is going to be the ability to hear people come back from the dawn and tell you things, and to be able to understand them, believe in them, and incorporate them. You know? There's this very immature attitude that we take a lot of times, and it costs you a lot of your life, which is, I need to make my own mistakes. You know, I'm sure some of you are that person, but you've heard people say this, right? I've got to make my own mistakes. Got to make my own mistakes. Really? You have to. Because a lot of the tragedies in life are caused by that, man. When people come back and give you advice, they're trying to spare you from those tragedies. You know, I mean, what happens if you get hit by a bus going 45 miles an hour down Highland? What happens to you?
You get hit by a bus?
But what happens to you when you hit by that bus?
God.
I don't know. I got to make my own mistakes. You know? And we think about these kinds of things, that people who have gone somewhere come back from the brink and come back and want to warn us and tell us about stuff. It's good for us to be able to listen to him and go, maybe they know a little something about life. Like you're talking to your grandparents and we have a tendency to just think, oh, the world was different back then. The world was different, but humanity was the same. History is a series of examples of people, humans with same nature, trying to adapt with ever-changing civilization, if that makes sense. That's the history of the world. People trying to adapt to advancements of civilization. Your grandparents were trying to adapt to the advent of television and how it could spread messages. You guys are trying to deal, my generation, man, we had to deal with the fact that there was no more enemy out in the world. the Soviet Union had collapsed, and so we walked around and we didn't know what the hell to make of it. So what did we do? We put on flannel, got some guitars, and complained about things. There was something about teen spirit in there. And then we bought overpriced coffee. We shoved our hands in our pockets and we said, commercialism, man. So bad. Because we're trying to deal with the world that didn't look like it used to. And you guys are dealing with a world that, but our natures haven't changed. It's just the society around us has changed. I'm trying to make sense of that. And so it's worthwhile looking at your grandparents and seeing how it is that they coped with it. Even though the world's different, the coping mechanisms might be helpful. What I'm suggesting to you is that the dreamers are the ones who go out there and experience things and come back, and they see it before the rest of us. But their punishment is that no one's going to believe them when they come back and tell us these things. It might be worthwhile to listen to what they're saying. When we're listening to what Socrates is talking about in the allegory of the cave, we might sit and go, oh, there's no proof of that, there's no this. This is a guy who devoted his life to reasoning. If you know nothing else about him, that should be enough to listen to what the person has to say. It doesn't mean you have to believe what a person says. But when people devote their lives to things, and they come back and want to tell you about it, it's worthwhile listening to it, within reason. You don't want to get stuck there for 2 hours at Taco Bell. You know? The other day I was at Starbucks and I got caught up by a guy who was telling jokes. You know, I stand there waiting for the coffee, and the guy asked me, how are you today? I said, outstanding, man. How are you? He says, I'm doing well, I'm doing well. Hey, have you seen the circus that came to San Diego? I said, I have not. He says, oh man, it's intense. Right. That's funny. And then the guy just sat there while I was waiting for my coffee and just kept giving me jokes like that. You know? You know? I could have been like, shut up, old man.
He said a joke.
Maybe I should have done that.
He said digging for rock.
Yeah, if you're missing it, intense versus intense. Yeah, exactly. It's corny. Well, would you rather the guy sat there and told me blue jokes, you know? And so, dirty jokes or perverted jokes or racial jokes, you know? Hey, what do you get when you mix that? You know? That's probably a little uncomfortable, you know? But that's all it is. You know, the dreamer is the person who walks by moonlight. By the way, I'll leave it with this. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about the dreamer, the intellectual adventurer. That's the person who goes out forth and experiences these things. Has anybody in here ever been in a place that, like you're away from the city, out in the desert, out in the mountains, whatever, where it's really dark at night? Yeah. There's no lights? Yeah. How dark is it?
It's like pitch black.
Yeah, it's pitch black. Even then, I mean, if you've never experienced that before, it's the kind of thing you'd have to experience. If you're like, yeah, I've been to Cowles Mountain at night before. No, man. The lights are still down there. It's still providing light. It gets so dark that you can't see 10, 15 feet in front of you. It's that dark, especially if there's no moon out that night. Now, when there's a full moon, you're like, wow, this is amazing. I can see 20 feet in front of me. You know, it gives you lots of license to walk around. You know, but if you're walking by the moonlight, you're walking by faith. Again, you don't know what's in front of you, but you're walking by faith. The same way that I was saying earlier that great thinkers do. They walk by faith. They don't know if there's an answer at the end of it. Well, wouldn't it be awesome if you found it? You know? It's one of those reasons that I talk about with regards to literature. Why should you read books? Why should you read fiction? Why should you read stories? Because, man, if you read those things, you understand that one lifetime is not enough. Yeah, but that requires that you're willing to sit back and listen to what the dreamer has to say. In other words, I lived my lifetime so far. Who knows when it ends? Could be today or it could be tomorrow. Could go on forever. In which case I'm doomed. What's that?
You're immortal as well.
I am immortal.
You are God.
Well, Socrates would say that we all are.
God is
God's chill.
No.
I was like, go for it, man. My point is just that I've read Nietzsche, and so therefore I've lived Nietzsche's life. I can look at it and go, what an amazing life. I've read Wilde, Oscar Wilde. I know Wilde's life inside and out. I've lived his lifetime. You know, I lived Eliot's lifetime. I've lived Doolittle's lifetime. I've lived Wordsworth's lifetime. All these writers who I read, I've read all of their lifetimes. And that means I've been able to pack thousands and thousands of years into, it's really just a fraction of a second, if even that, in the grand scheme of things. You know? You can live through these experiences and have them. So, I'll let you have the last word, Sheila. You're going to say something. Oh, damn, I wasn't going to give you the last word.
I'll get that with last
So I could look sure. Mark.
That's
History repeats itself. End of video.
Video drops the mic. History repeats itself.